The bedrock behind this comprehensive security model is that we have been having a general male conscription for the entire time that we have been independent, for more than 100 years.
Hello and welcome back to The Focus. Joining us today from Helsinki, Finland is Brigadier General Jyri Raitasalo, Commander of the Karelia Brigade and Docent of Strategy and Security Policy at the Finnish National Defence University. Finland is an interesting country. It practices something called total defence. We'll talk about what this means in the Finnish sense before turning to see whether another country, namely Australia, could undertake a similar strategic posture. Let's dive in. Jyri, welcome to The Focus.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.
Jyri, Finland's defence strategy is rooted in total defence and high levels of societal resilience. Can you briefly outline what that looks like in practice and why it works for Finland?
Yeah, sure. Total defense was a concept and a model that we built during the Cold War era, after the Second World War, of getting prepared, mostly for military attack from the Soviet Union. And when the Cold War ended, we have changed the system of preparing for military threats with the capabilities of the civil society. Was more comprehensive approach. So this comprehensive approach today, comprehensive security model as we call it, means that we are getting prepared for military and non-military threats through cooperation between different authorities, business life and the third sector, also involving individuals and the third sector. So this means that it's not only military threats today that we need to get prepared against. Quite a lot of the different kinds of risks and threats that could materialize are in a way civilian in nature or have effects on the civilian society. So it works both ways, from the military to the civilian side and from the civilian side to the military side. And we've been doing this for decades, which means that we have a system where different authorities, business life, and the third sector, plan together, they prepare together, and we do exercises together to see that we are up to the task, whatever the threats that materialize are.
Before we head on to the greater part of our discussion about Finland and Australia and what we can borrow from Finland, I'm curious, there are a couple of things that you've just said. Firstly, that this was effectively a Cold War era construct. But, when the Cold War ended, how was this greeted in Finland? I mean, the rest of the world paid a peace dividend. You guys were still neutral and had been neutral up until recently when you joined NATO. Was it the neutrality that kept it going, or was it a case of, you've got this huge, uncertain neighbor, and you just needed to keep everything going in spite of the fact that the rest of the world was busily disarming? I think that's certainly an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, I think it brings quite a lot of realism into your analysis of security environment. Then you have a great power as a next door neighbor, and it's a great power that has been aggressive against you in history several times. So, when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia was the inheritant state of the Soviet Union. And of course, as all Western states, Finland included, we were trying to engage Russia for positive development and cooperation. I think this worked for several years, and also Russia had some internal problems in the 1990s and early 2000s. But as we have seen during the last decade and a half, these relations have turned more sour. So I would say that we have been preparing for the worst in the military sphere as well as within the civilian life, as well civilian society threats, but at the same time trying to engage and cooperate with Russia. So it's kind of dual approach. And what you said about neutrality, when the Cold War ended, Finland joined the European Union. So in a way, we were military non-aligned, but we were still part of the West. So we were part of the Western society and West Europe, but not being part of a defensive alliance, which means NATO. So we have been part of NATO for a little bit more than 2 years now. So that is a change that has happened, and of course it happened because of Russia's big invasion of Ukraine in February 2022.
You know what really fascinates me about Finland is that I absolutely understand everything that you've said, but the one thing that stands head and shoulders above pretty much everywhere else in the West is that there has been this consistent idea of total defense in Finland, that in spite of the changing international relations situation, you guys have been consistent. Are you not tired of having this self-disciplined approach? I mean, if you look at other Western countries, Australia is the typical example here. If we don't have a threat, we put up our feet, we relax, we're quite happy to accept that. But you guys haven't done that. You still had uh, put your shoulder to the wheel. You still have that cautious approach to protecting the peace, where the rest of the West kind of, after the peace dividend was paid, it was like, well, we don't have any war anymore. Let economics dictate everything and everything will be fine. What makes Finland so special in that sense, Jyri?
Well, I think it's a tradition of being aware that there is this potential crisis behind the corner that we have this tradition going back into history for way more than 100 years. So I think that is kind of the mentality of the people. But on the other hand, I would say that when the Cold War ended, we did make big changes into our total defense concept. So it was pretty much more about threats to civilian society that were not supposed to be man-made. We live in vulnerable societies. If electricity is cut off, if water is cut off, whatever can happen. If there's a huge number of migrants coming across the border, so there are many things that could happen and go wrong, even if somebody is not intentionally causing that. So I think that in the Finnish mentality, you need to be prepared also for those kinds of things. So we have been preparing for man-made and natural disasters or not intentionally caused problems in our society. So I think that is the way how we think. That is the way how we think about security and being prepared in order to be safe.
So, what are the core doctrinal pillars that support this Finnish approach, and how has it shaped force structure and civil-military relations within Finland?
Well, it would take quite a long time to tell you kind of the nitty-gritty parts, but let's make some crude few basic points. I would say, the bedrock behind this comprehensive security model is that we have been having a general male conscription for the entire time that we have been independent, for more than 100 years. So every household in Finland practically has a citizen soldier, a reservist, or several of those who are actually spending between 5.5 months and 11.5 months in the military service in order to get military training, and then are put into the reserves. In my family, I have 3 kids, so it's me and then 2 of my sons who are doing conscription. So one has already done his conscription and it's now in the reserves, and the boy who is now turning 20, he's just starting next January. So I would say, first of all, every household in Finland is a stakeholder in our own security. That is the kind of the bedrock. And on top of that, we have a tradition going back decades with this comprehensive security model, and before that of total defense, of different authorities and business life and the third sector cooperate. So it's natural. It's something that we have been doing for decades. So we don't have to invent new parts. And even if the times have changed, moving to this peace dividend era that you mentioned several times, we still realize that we can turn this model to take care of the modern threats that may include military ones, but are mostly non-military in nature. And of course, what we are seeing now in Europe after 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine and the war is still continuing, it has been going on for almost 1100 days. So we are still we have to reintroduce the military aspect more forcefully into this. But it doesn't have to change the model. It just changes the emphasis and the relations between different actors within this model. So I would say that it's a good way of having continuity, but also it provides possibilities to adapt to the demands of the day.
Now that Finland is part of NATO and you're having to relate to professional military forces that don't have conscription, say for instance the forces of the United States, they don't have conscription, how do you guys feel working alongside these guys? Do you think that they're, I hate to say it, but relatively naive in the way that they view the near Arctic plains and all this kind of thing? Because Finland knows the terrain, it knows things about the countryside that obviously a visiting force of Americans simply wouldn't, in spite of their higher technologies and whatever they bring to the table? How's the relationship going between, you know, a conscripted force on the one side and a professional military force on another?
Well, I don't think that we are seeing our allied military as naive. I think that they are professional military units and people, and we are cooperating them. And when you are looking at an exercise, when we have our troops and foreign troops, let's say from the US or UK or wherever, our allies, you can't tell apart if it's a professional or the so-called all-volunteer force or a conscripted force. So they are doing the same things. Their level of professionalism is the same. Of course, we have the kind of a home turf advantage, but that's why I think it's really good that we get these allied troops to practice with us and to exercise with us in our terrain and our conditions, so that if push goes to shove, they know how to operate in Finland. And of course, we are getting a lot of new ideas how to fight and how to cooperate, how to be interoperable when we get these troops to exercise with us. So I would say, I have a high regard for the militaries that are coming over and are exercising with us. I respect them, and they are really professional. And I would say that we are going hand in hand with these forces.
Australia, by contrast to Finland, has relied heavily on high-tech platforms, long supply chains, alliances, and we have a very small professional force. Do you think this model is sustainable in an age of strategic disruption and, dare I say, in an age of significant parts of the world being at war?
Well, of course, I can't tell you what's the right choice for you down under. I think that's for you to decide. But I would say that lately, at least in Europe, there has been a lot of discussion about many countries needing bigger militaries. And I think there is a lot of discussion in Europe as we speak about how to do that. Whether you can do that with the all-professional force or all volunteer force, giving or paying more people to join the military, or whether you are going to have some model of conscription or some system like that, whether it's reserves based on all volunteer force. There are several ways to organize this. But I would say that many states have realized that the kind of the peace dividend era that you mentioned of the last 30 years is over. We are living in a more dangerous world, and not only in Europe. I would say that if I look at the Asia Pacific area, in the Pacific area, you are experiencing exactly the same. So I do think that it's a relevant concern for the decision makers and for the militaries to think and figure out how to go bigger and how to go more lethal.
One of the big concerns that we have here in Australia is, of course, having enough people within the various military units that we have. We have a deficit, I would argue, and the few people that we have in the all-volunteer structure have to do more and more to carry the burden of defence moving forward, which probably puts us at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to facing off against countries like China that doesn't have those sort of problems. It may have other different problems that we're not aware of. But problems specific to Australia means that we really have to try to come up with different ways in an all-volunteer structure to enlist people, bring people into the forces, but not only just bring them in, to keep them there, which is another problem. Young people in this country don't see defence as anything other than a sort of camp out for a little while and then they get out. There's the few people who are really into the military usually come from a military background, but they're becoming fewer and fewer as time goes on. So how do you think in an all-volunteer structure we could go about trying to improve recruitment when our recruiting ads are so lame? I mean, really, when you look at some of the Australian recruitment ads that we get on TV or in the cinema every so often, it looks as though it's a scouting organization. People are going out in the bush, they're kicking around with a weapon or two. It looks all very cool, but there's the notion of them actually being in uniform to fight for their country is completely missing. And it's probably something that says, it probably says something about the Western way of warfare in all volunteer structures. Unless we're forced into it, we don't really see the necessity to do the hard yards.
Yeah, I do think that you're right in a way that when we're talking about all volunteer forces, I think so. That is my personal opinion. that automatically kind of turns the relationship between the military and the society into weak one over the years and decades. And of course, that's a problem when your own citizens don't recognize what you are and what you do and why when we're talking about the military forces. So that is one of the main reasons I'm really happy that we have retained the conscription system, so that when, for example, I'm a commander of Karelia Brigade, so every weekend from my brigade we send about 2,500 conscripts to their weekend leaves with their families and loved ones, their girl and boyfriends and their moms and dads. They tell the story of what they have been doing here, and whether it's hard training or whatever. I'm happy that the narrative is spread around the Finnish society. And it resonates because at their homes, when the conscripts go back home, there are people who have done their service early. So I do think that we don't have to have these kinds of add-on narratives or ads to get people interested in the military aspects of security. I think that they are interested. So I would say that for all volunteer forces that have been there with this system for several decades, there is going to be problems with societal relations, as you have been describing, and the ways how to solve this problem, I don't know. I don't have the kind of the track record of making the analysis. But I would say that as a kind of a political decision maker, I would definitely put effort to this. How can you actually make people contribute to the society and the general security, even if you don't kind of start a new way to conscript people for the military? But I do think that if citizens are stakeholders in society, they are productive ones, and they are useful then, and then you won't have this problem, for example, of not having enough ideas or having enough knowledge about what everybody needs to do.
It's almost a generational thing here in Australia, if truth be told. Many years ago, I wore the uniform as a reservist, and I did the whole Anzac Day ceremony. But we had a lot of veterans from World War I, from World War II, from Vietnam War, from Korea, I should say, and the Vietnam War veterans. So when we all went out together on parade, we could once a year remind ourselves of the contributions of Australian service personnel in wars gone past. But as those numbers have slowly dwindled and fewer and fewer people are looking at the military as a career option, because you get paid much better in the civilian areas, I think that there must be some sort of form of different community set up in Finland, because there is a disconnect now between our all-volunteer force and the society it's meant to serve. That it looks kind of like a Praetorian Guard, but it doesn't look like an armed force. Whereas when you look at Finland, there's a sense of national community, which I think is very valuable. And I think there is something that we can possibly learn from, but we really do need to have open-minded politicians to give it a real fair crack, to be quite honest with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, it's not going to be easy to try to reinstate conscription or bring something back just like that with the snap of your fingers. But I do think that the discussion that you are now talking about, societal or political discussion about making people stakeholders, that's really important. And I think there are several ways of doing that. The other part is when we're talking about all volunteer force, which of course, as you mentioned, it's really important to keep people in. And when they leave, how do you use those people then? What is their role in the defense? Because of course you need the skills that they have acquired during their all volunteer service. They need to be, I would say, in my opinion, they would need to be used in wartime scenarios as well, reservists or some other way.
Look, Jyri, what aspects of Finland's approach, such as dispersed logistics, civilian infrastructure planning, or total defense generally, could be realistically indigenized to suit Australia's geography and political culture, do you think?
Well, first of all, it's really hard to, transfer or transplant ideas and ways to operate directly. So, you always need to because everybody has a different tradition, different culture, different legislation, different relations between authorities. So it's always hard. But I would say that the best thing is to kind of have a holistic approach, somebody looking over one administration or administrative silos. Somebody should be kind of in charge of looking at the whole picture, and then start from that, start planning together. So I think that is really important. And I would say that once we go beyond planning, and we get these people to cooperate on a practical, on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, that different authorities come together, when maybe with the main businesses as well, as we get networks of people who familiarize themselves with others, then this becomes kind of a reality. It becomes a concrete thing. People know each other, and then it's easier to cooperate in the future. So I would say you need to take baby steps. You need to start with a holistic approach, top-down approach, and then partly as you're moving along, and if this will take years or even decades, then you will kind of solidify this cooperation with the practical advantages that everybody can see is coming out of these arrangements.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Jyri, given Finland's proximity to Russia, as you mentioned earlier, and the history of conflict, your country treats defense as a national duty. How can Australia cultivate a similar mindset in a society with no direct land threat? I mean, everything has to come over the ocean for us. And I think that we've always considered our luck by saying the tyranny of distance from other places saves Australia. So we can, again, take a more relaxed approach with regard to defense generally. Is proximity to Russia Finland's great driver? And if that is the case, can Australia cultivate that mindset even with a more distant China, a China that has to cross the seas to come to Australia? I mean, we recently had a Chinese flotilla who conducted a live fire exercise in the Tasman Sea, and then they proceeded to circumnavigate Australia. I mean, that's the first time that a potential threat has ever done that sort of thing. Not even the Japanese during World War II did this. I find it astounding that we've just come out of a national election, that it wasn't a khaki election, that people weren't up in arms, that our defense forces seem to have been asleep at the wheel at this time. I mean, are we concerned about China? And if we're not concerned about China, why pretend to be concerned about China? Is it more about the United States being concerned, so therefore we're concerned? Because we're busily trading with them hand over fist.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack of what you just asked me. I would start with the distance part. I think in a way you have the kind of the advantage of having a moat around you. So I think that is something that is beneficial in a way for your national security and also national defense. But of course, if you look at the development of technology, so the military threats, they are not just invading land force. So there are several new ways, whether that's cyber, whether there's long range fires, coming forces and capabilities coming from the sea and so on, that could endanger you. So I would say, again, it's really hard to give you any lessons, but I can just give you kind of some ideas about how I see it as a Finn. I would say that one of the best things to make people care is to talk truth to them. In a way, describe what you actually are, how you see the situation, so that people can actually relate to this. You mentioned about, is this about threat inflation? Is somebody just pumping up threat? Just your political actors doing this? There will always be kind of political disagreements about how to define the main threats, and I think that's understandable. But at least in our case, next to Russia, there is quite a lot of cohesion in our political parties relating to the military threats, and I think that is something that is part of the Finnish society and Finnish culture, that we have been invaded by Russia. So yes, for us it is quite a lot about Russia and the history with the Soviet Union and Russia, so that everybody has practically the same kinds of notions about potential military threats. So I'm not saying that Russia is going to invade us. I don't think we in Finland are scared about Russia's invasion, but we are preparing our military to make sure that this will never happen. And I think there's a big difference, because if you are scared all the time, you won't be making the best of decisions. But I would say that when you are prepared enough, you don't have to be scared, and that's why I'm happy that we never dismantled the military machine that we are continuing to build. But of course, in the Finnish case, we have been doing cheap defense as well. During the peace dividend decades. So now we are upping the ante, and we have just doubled our defense budget, and we are still going to raise it. Let's see what NATO comes up with next month when there's the next summit, when the state leaderships are going to be meeting and defining the next targets. But we are going to do more as well, and I think that's highly needed.
I'm John Bruni, and you're listening to Sage International's The Focus podcast from Helsinki, Finland. We're speaking with Brigadier General Jyri Raitasalo on whether Australia could learn from Finland's total defense posture. So, Jyri, again, when we talk about geography as a key element in a nation's defense, do you think that Australia's island geography makes it complacent when it comes to territorial defence? I mean, I remember back in the 1980s, there were people in the Labour Party side of politics who did some very deep studies about self-reliant defence force. We sent people off to Sweden at the time to see whether or not we could borrow some of their ideas and integrate them within the ADF. And that came to naught because ultimately I think that people understood that it was Sweden's neutrality that made them strong, and we would never be a neutral state. We were always going to be America's junior partner in the Indo-Pacific, which again says something about the position of Australia in the world. We are not a neutral country. If we were a neutral country, we probably would have a very similar mindset to the Finns and to the Swedes. But because we think that we are safe under America's extended deterrence, America's umbrella, everything will work out okay because we can trust them. However, we now live in the Trump 47 era. Trust doesn't seem to be thick on the ground among many Western allies, which may also have some interesting implications for Finland as well as it moves closer and deeper within the NATO structure. But if Australia is, and some Australians are actually voicing their concerns, if we are voicing our concerns about whether we can trust the Americans over things like AUKUS, does Finland also share those kind of concerns, being a new member of a Western alliance rather than being a neutral country where everything was just about how you saw yourselves and protecting yourselves?
Well, yeah, John, as you mentioned, Finland and Sweden joined NATO just 2+ years ago. So
Yeah.
it is pretty new. So we are still integrating that into our system, our defense system, our political system, and also into our mentality. So I would say that quite a lot of how we think, how we in Finland in general think about defense and security with others is that, yes, it's good to be allied. It's really good to have 31 other states that have made commitments to help you if you are in trouble, and you have made the same commitments to the other countries. It's really good, but you always need to have your own capabilities. I think that is the kind of the tradition that where we are coming. So what you have yourself is something that you can use immediately when threat starts emerging, and you don't have to start negotiating with others of how to respond. So I do think that, and I'm talking as a Finn here, that NATO membership is really good. It strengthens us and makes us more secure, but that doesn't remove the fact that we need national good preparations, good national defense capability, and still the old total defense model remade into this day. So I would say this is a mix of different arrangements to be safe and secure in today's world, and being allies within NATO is one part of that. And you are right. You mentioned Trump 47. It seems that the United States is undergoing a process of redefining its relations with the world, with its allies in Europe and in Asia Pacific area, but also vis-a-vis Russia and China. And I'm not sure how this is all going to end up, but all the indicators that I have seen, and I would say just came out from the meetings here at the Karelia Brigade in Finland with our allies, I have seen nothing at the military level that would tell me that some big changes are about to happen soon. Of course, we have to be prepared for that, but I'm really happy that we are still doing good cooperation at the political, but also at the military level with our allies, including the United States.
Look, I think that we can all breathe a sigh of relief. I think that in terms of the military to military relationships that we in the allied situation that we have with the United States, it's still working. It's at the political level where the trust is being broken. And I think that people, especially in our respective political spheres, are starting to wonder whether or not the Americans under the current president are going to stand by us when we need it. And I think that really from a Finnish perspective, I'd be very, very worried about the I don't know, dare I say, friendly relations that Donald Trump has been striking up with Vladimir Putin lately. That could be a very big concern. I mean, how if we were to extend that thought forward slightly, Jyri, how is Helsinki seeing this? I mean, it could be a blip in history. It could just be that, Donald Trump will serve out his term. It will be kind of inconsequential. There was a lot of hot air blown out by the media about this, that, and the other. But in the end, everything's going to settle down and we're going to have a relatively solid relationship with the Americans moving forward. But if, on the other hand, it doesn't turn out like that, and say, for instance, the worst case scenario happens and Trump normalizes relations with Russia, where would that put Helsinki?
Well, I think if you look at the discussion in Europe and also Canada, so let's say 31 nations out of 32 in NATO, I do think that the message these days is loud and clear, so that it's not going to be normal relations with Russia, whatever happens anytime soon.
Yeah.
So I think there is so many things have happened during the last 3+ years, not only in Ukraine but also within Europe, what many people are describing as hybrid warfare, or bringing chaos into European cities. But I don't think that any European states are going to kind of normalize relations with Russia in the upcoming years. So Russia has to change a lot before that will be feasible, even if the United States did. So in a way, I'm not worried about that, but I do think that some people are concerned, and they are looking out and trying to see how this relationship between the United States and Europe, United States and Russia, the United States and its allies in Asia are going to turn up. But we have no idea. We don't know yet. But so far, I haven't seen any kind of practical, concrete changes in the relations between our counterparts in the US or in other NATO allies.
Okay, well, fingers crossed that that stays like it is. Now, if we get back quickly to the notion of national service, I mean, I know that many professional soldiers, sailors, and airmen in Australia like things the way they are, in spite of the woefully inadequate forces the country has. Not enough trained personnel, not enough kit. But there is a sort of an underlying hostility from the military establishment to developing a force structure based on national service. And this seems to be a thing about professional military people at the upper end of the command chain. They don't want all the ruffians coming in to get trained. They just want to be soldiers, sailors, and airmen doing their professional duties without having that burden of training the citizenry. How does the professional Finnish military overcome this bias against conscription? Because there had to have been a time where that bias was also held by certain people in Finland, and then it changed and it created its own thing. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's really hard for me to say how other militaries are thinking from an all volunteer force perspective, because we never had it. But I would say this, that if you make any kind of sound strategic analysis about the correlation of forces and military capabilities between Russia and Finland, you can't come up with any practical solution to Finnish defense than general conscription and big reserves. I think that is the only doable alternative. So even if you would like to have a smaller force, maybe a more high-end capability force, but smaller one, if you just look at the size of the Finnish territorial area, and if you look at the capabilities that Russia has, it makes no sense. I would say, though, that we are not just mass. Part of the Finnish Defense Forces wartime organization, quite a big part actually, is of course procured with and equipped with the high-end capabilities as well. Because in the modern battlefield, you can't just bring mass; you need to have good capabilities. So that's why we are spending in this decade lots and lots of billions on new fighter planes, on new navy ships, and new capabilities for the army. So we are combining big reserves with adequate equipment to give them, so that every citizen soldier has a return ticket to the front.
With regard to that, Yuri, we have a defense force that's very dependent on foreign weapons, essentially from the United States, but some from Europe, and now we're starting to get some from South Korea as well, perhaps even Japan in the future, which is good. But because Australia is basically a farm and a mine, we don't have the manufacturing capability that is necessary to sustain these foreign weapons systems. A lot of the F-35s would have to be flown back to the United States for deep maintenance. We wouldn't be able to do that in Australia. Now, in a case of war, that would put Australia on the back foot. Finland, unlike Sweden, Sweden's got a very robust, almost independent defense manufacturing capability. Finland still buys equipment from other countries. So how can we see Finland create a comprehensive defense structure but still be dependent on foreign weaponry? I mean, I don't know if that made much sense, but there is that kind of thing where you've got a great structure, but you still need the F-18s. The F-18s will have to come from the United States or Canada or elsewhere. So how do you make that all work?
Well, I don't think any state in this modern world can escape the dilemma of supply chains. So whatever you get, whether it's a missile, a fighter plane, whether it's a rifle, there are many parts and many materials that are coming from places that you wouldn't believe. So I think every state has the same problem. But I think the best we can do and what we are doing with this is when we have capability development plans and we are procuring new systems, which means buying new stuff for the military. We are looking at the supply chains and we are looking at the suppliers of these weapons and the ammunition. So we are analyzing so that is it possible during crisis time to get additional supplies? And of course, we have to do this analysis all the time. So I do think that is the best that any state can do. There are no guarantees. You can't, because the service age of many of the platforms is something like 30, 40, or 50 years. Some even up to 100 years, like the B-52 bombers.
Yes.
So this means that you have to do your best analysis today, but of course there is always this part that it looks like a little bit of a leap of faith. How will this turn out to be in 20 or 25 years time? Sometimes it's really hard to predict even 3 years. So I do agree with you. You have to be prepared, and that's why also you need to kind of make national or domestic decisions. How much will you pay extra in order to buy, for example, maintenance abilities to your homeland, so that you don't have to ship a platform somewhere to a foreign country to be maintained or repaired, so that you can get those capabilities back home. And that is part of the procurement process. You need additional money, and you have to invest in that, which is not only just just people doing the mechanics. It's also know-how, and that's important in today's high-tech military environment.
Jyri, what about the new industrial processes called just in time? We have this idea that if we have a long planning cycle, we can superimpose this just-in-time theory where you don't have to have stocks of stuff. Now, that works in the civilian field. It also works in the military field. And of course, no one wants to have huge warehouses, which would have great big targets put on them. So in that case, how does Finland deal with the notion that we have this thing called just in time? It's much better to get stuff in, use that stuff, and not hold huge stocks? Or do you have a more balanced situation where you do warehouse, artillery shells and missiles and so on and so forth? So you have that kind of a capacity to fight immediately when a crisis arises.
Yeah, well, personally, I'm not the guy who is going to be very favorable on just-in-time thinking in the military sphere.
Yeah.
If you have a warehouse, or let's say you have 100 warehouses full of artillery grenades, then if something happens, you can distribute those to the troops immediately. If you have what I would call a virtual warehouse, that you may order something and somebody has promised that they will ship it in 24 hours or 7 weeks or whatever, you never know if that's actually going to happen. So I would say that when push goes to shove, when everybody goes hunting for the same material, whether it's tanks, ammunition, aerial bombs, or whatever, then you might be in trouble. So I would say that quite a lot of this being prepared part is that you are actually spending the money and you are warehousing it and you are maintaining it and you are upgrading it, whether it's ammunition or platforms.
Jyri, just finally, there have been media reports suggesting that there's a Russian buildup near Finland. How alarmed are you about this? And is there a higher state of alert happening in Finland because of it?
Well, no, there's not high state of alert as we speak. As we talked already, we are not scared that Russia is going to invade us. That's why we have been prepared have been preparing our defenses for decades. But yes, you are right. Russia is building its military infrastructure next to our border. It has done a revision of its military sea command and control system. It has kind of it used to have a Western military district that it made into 2 districts, and the Leningrad district is now next door to us and the Baltic states, and it's building new garrisons, and it's upgrading its brigade into divisions, so bigger formations. So this will mean that when the war in Ukraine is going to end, as Russia has said it out loud in publicly, they are going to have more Russian troops next to our border. I would say that the number of troops will double to triple in the next decade. They are already also making some new formations, forming, for example, a new army corps. I do think that as such, that's not a direct threat, but of course, if relations turn sour and Russia continues its aggressive behavior after the war in Ukraine, that is something that we have to take care into our calculations and preparations. Of course, part of NATO as well.
Jyri, thank you for your insights on the focus.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. From Helsinki, Finland, that was Brigadier General Jyri Raitasalo, Docent of Strategy and Security Policy at the Finnish National Defence University. Thank you for joining me, John Bruni, for today's episode with Jyri Raitasalo. Check out the links in our show notes to learn more about Jyri and connect with him on social media. Now, on to questions for the audience. Do you think Australia should move toward a model of total defence like Finland, involving every citizen, not just the military? If Australia introduced national service or mandatory civil defence training, would it build resilience or provoke backlash in a society used to peace and comfort? Is Australia too reliant on high-tech platforms and foreign alliances, or should we focus more on homegrown, adaptable and people-powered defence strategies? Let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a free way to support us. You can also subscribe to the podcast on the Ozcast Network, iTunes, and Spotify, where we'd appreciate your 5-star reviews. Do you have comments or questions about the podcast? Post them in the comments section on YouTube, and I'll do my best to respond to as many as I can. My thanks as ever to producer of The Focus, Neil Smart. Please stay connected with us on social media. Follow me on X at Bruni Doctor, and follow The Focus on X at TheFocus_Sage, and now on Blue Sky on thefocuspodadl.bsky.social. From Adelaide, South Australia, you've been listening to The Focus.